I think we've made really good progress with regards to understanding that the nature of work itself has changed. And I think that there's a willingness to look at that. I think in instances of the unknowns, fear can still play a role and make us retract and try to think of, hey, when was the last time we were successful doing this? Let's go back. And you really can't at this point. I think the biggest change is that colleagues and prospective colleagues have a lot more bargaining power than they used to. Because for those that have taken the time to really think about what enables them to be the best contributor, that is sometimes in conflict with what the companies think. And so I think the biggest change is that colleagues have a seat at the table, or prospects have a seat at the table that they otherwise did not. And I think the smartest ones have learned how to partner and prove that no matter where they're working, no matter what the policies are, that they're prioritizing their own health and well-being as a means not just to be selfish, but to basically show up as a better colleague for the company at large.
Hey friends, welcome to the Changing Work podcast. We are so glad you're here.
My name is Nick.
And I'm Scott.
And this is the podcast where we talk about changing work from the inside out.
So if you're into making the workplace and the world a better experience via conscious business practices, stick around. This is for you. Mia is a globally respected thought leader in the business of wellness and brand strategy. She helps organizations leverage wellness as a strategic differentiator. And previously, she was SVP and Global Head of Wellbeing at Hyatt. And now she is President and CEO and Chief Love Officer, I love that, at her own shop. So welcome.
Thank you, Scott. I'm very glad to be here. Love this agenda and what you've put together today. It's great.
Good stuff. All right, so before we rock into it, what is one thing that makes your heart light up?
Oh, gosh. Cooking for people that I love. I mean, there's no question. Like if I, that's my love language is nurturing you from the inside out. I love cooking people a good meal.
Okay, I love it. Okay, let's take this a click further. So all of us, however many are watching, you're gonna, well, maybe there's a smaller group, but you're there to cook for us. Like, what is your go-to meal? Like, what are we gonna have?
I love a good roast turkey or roast chicken with like just, the potatoes, all the goodness. If you're coming to Maine for the first time, where I am going to bring out the lobster, make you a Maine blueberry pie, and get really regional. So those are the two go-tos.
It's early here in California, but that sounds pretty great. That might make me hungry. Awesome. So I know that one of the things you talk about is institutionalizing love as a business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, they're going to be like, yeah, of course. And for some people, like, oh, what? So tell us what that means.
Sure. And yeah, for those people that are like, what? It's a 4-letter word. It's really about positivity management. And, love, I had a theory back when we were all stuck in our homes in 2020 that love could pay if we institutionalize it as a business practice. And so people weren't using that term. So I started just looking at different forms of positivity. And I don't know if anyone's ever read Dr. Barbara Fredrickson's book, Positivity. It's awesome. And it talks about 10 different forms: hope, gratitude, awe, a number of other things. But love is the superpower of positivity management. And so it's really about managing people's strengths, starting meetings off with what's going well, what not necessarily what's going bad. Taking a moment to think about how to, celebrate the wins, right? And as you go, there's a number of things if you really look at the science, but I started realizing that really the future is so much more about how we work, not what we do or from where. And I think love has a pivotal role. And if anyone's listening and thinks that they need data, there's actually data out there that supports this from a business perspective. And so it doesn't just feel good or do good, but it does help you to reach business and brand objectives, which obviously we need to manage in tandem.
Perfect. Love it. Well, let's dig in a little bit. So how does it do some of those things? Can you connect the dots between some of these practices and actually business results?
Sure. When I wrote an article on this, I actually studied some companies, and a good example of one is not necessarily using it from a marketing perspective, right? We've seen companies like Coca-Cola and McDonald's do that, and that's a nice and. Institutionalizing is really looking at how are your leaders conducting themselves? How are they sort of delivering the programs, the communicating the objectives that they want to bring to life? And I studied a company, everyone knows Prudential Insurance, that actually was preparing to acquire another company that was really operating at a multi-million dollar loss. And so when they started strategizing as a team, how to really link arms, make this more of a merger like feeling versus acquisition, which we've all been through and it can be different. They started really thinking about how they were going to bring out the best in the company's leaders that they were acquiring. And it was a really thoughtful approach. And while they didn't call it love, it was very much focused on how do we focus on the positive to bring out the best in this company and turn the performance around. And the commitment, the proactive commitment to thinking about who to keep, not necessarily who to cut, which is what happens when we look at acquisitions. Thinking about what were the things they were doing well despite the loss, and a number of other behaviors. They actually, within a couple of years of acquisition, were able to turn it around to a multi-million dollar growth.
Mm.
And so there are other companies to look at. Subaru's actually done a great job at this. Southwest Airlines, looking at love much more strategically as it relates to inclusion and diversity, including their customer promises to their customers, net promoter score. There's a number of things that when they point to, it's really focused on the positive and what's going well and what could everyone do better together.
Amazing. You mentioned a couple names, and this is often what people ask me because we're out in the world talking about conscious business, and people say, "Well, who's getting this right?" And I would love to hear from you, like, because we all see different things. Who do you think is getting this right, or at least getting parts of it right?
Certainly the companies I just mentioned. I mean, I
Yeah.
think Subaru does an amazing job. And really, I mean, their North Star is what they call their love promise. And so I think really
Mm,
looking at that, and you'll see it's much more than a marketing endeavor. It's very much a part of their DNA. I think Southwest is another example. If you look at their history, it's been very focused on that. I think they're doing a good job. Um, I think in the travel industry, if anyone's heard of a company called Skift, they're really sort of the intelligence platform for travel and hospitality. And they've gone since the pandemic, did 100% purely remote workforce. They get together as a team once to twice a year. They all talk about how everyone celebrates their individuality and where they want to live and who they are. And all they're doing is continuing to grow. They host events and summits around the world. So that's like a small example coupled with the bigger names that I mentioned earlier.
gotcha. I know a lot of the folks listening are HR professionals, probably people who are aligned with these topics. And, in some cases, they would love to implement this type of work, but they're not sure how, or they're not sure if they can get the buy-in from the people holding the purse strings. So let's talk about the buy-in for a second. How do we convince the CFO or the person above us with the money that this is a good idea?
Well, first with conviction. I think a lot of times we're scared, which is understandable, and I'm one of those people. I've had lots of lessons in a boardroom that I'd wish I learned before I got in there, right? I think all we can do is point to data and evidence that exists and making sure you pull that together, and we can help if you need it. But really talking about why it's important in the world that we're living in the 21st century world, to really start focusing much more about on how we work, not what we do. And I think that's important to drive wellness, well-being, brand and business performance, because excuse me, too many times we get afraid of what we think they'll say versus focusing on what we know is right.
So it starts with conviction. Yeah, I think if we're apologizing for it in advance, then we don't have a hope, right? So it starts with us. Okay, well then, what's it actually look like? I know that if these things are related, one of the things you do is you help companies make wellness a competitive advantage. Like,
Yes.
what does that look like? What do you actually do with companies?
We actually have a proprietary approach that sort of has been informed by roles that I've held for other companies before I ventured out on my own, leading wellness and well-being in some way, whether commercially, internally, or a combination of both. And we call it ecosystem of well-being. So we really start to think about, okay, are you trying to deliver a program at your company or a platform, since we're all so app crazy, or are we looking at making it part of who we are, part of your DNA? And
Mm,
so we look at sort of really five key constituents. We start with the leaders and we think about how they're modeling well-being in their organization, and that takes many shapes and forms, as you can imagine. And then if the employees see that, how do they feel? Do they feel like they have the permission to care for their own health and wellness and that of their teams? Typically, we find if those two groups are working well, that's turning around and influencing the experiences that the customers are having. That sort of third group. And if the customers are liking what you're selling, the products and services, and they're consuming more, they end up spending more, championing the cause. They become loved in their communities, the companies do. And then they end up having the resources to deliver impact, be more philanthropic, recruit better talent from that community. And that cycle repeats over and over again. So we really look at it much more holistically than I think, historically we've looked at workplace well-being separate from planetary well-being, separate from consumer well-being. And so this is a lens by which you can really take a step back and look at sort of a scorecard for the entire company that's really trying to make it much more part of their DNA.
that's good. Are there some industries or sectors you find where this works better than others? It's just more of a natural fit, or is this applicable to everyone?
It's really applicable to everyone. I think, by default, I've seen it work in both cases. Education, because of the nature of their schedules, is a little different. I've seen that work stronger in some instances, and I think that they look at things more intellectually, and so in some ways that is a good hill for them to climb. I think healthcare has a lot of opportunity, we'll say, on the other side of the spectrum.
Mhm.
And I think increasingly Fortune, 1,000 companies are starting to realize we do have much more remote workforces. It's almost a easier road to pay for these third-party workplace wellness offerings. And sometimes it takes the eye off of how do we function as a company and
Mm,
how are we behaving. And those things don't cost a lot of money, but they do cost behavior change. And that's
mhm.
that's something that people have to be willing to champion together.
Do you find that it's possible to make change if the senior most leadership team is not bought in, or is it
Absolutely not.
required?
Absolutely not. I will say, and this is from the girl who's tried, right?
Yeah.
You find that pocket in the organization of believers. They're in the middle of the organization, or perhaps it's a department,
Mm,
and you will have success as it grows. Um, but too often we take successful programs that have been successfully piloted in an aspect of the organization, but then we plug it back into a largely unwell system. And
mm,
so those returns are fleeting over time, right?
yeah.
And so that's ultimately a real challenge. And it also, at some point, is just, shines a light on a level of hypocrisy to colleagues. And
Sure.
I'm always a big champion of it doesn't have to be the CEO, but it does need to be someone from the C-suite who
Mhm,
can lead it with authenticity and is empowered to do so. And
mhm,
hopefully then it has the trickle down and trickle across effect that we need.
mhm. And you've been doing this for a while, so maybe could you talk to us about what has changed since you first started doing this work, and kind of we had the pandemic and now we're like whatever this phase is of post-pandemic or almost
Yeah.
post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Like what where are we? What has changed?
I think we've made really good progress with regards to understanding that the nature of work itself has changed. And I think that there's a willingness to look at that. I think in instances of the unknowns, fear can still play a role and take us, um, make us retract and try to think of, hey, when was the last time we were successful doing this? Let's go back.
Mm,
And you really can't at this point. I think the biggest change is that colleagues and prospective colleagues have a lot more bargaining power than they used to. Because for
mm,
those that have taken the time to, really think about what enables them to be the best contributor, that is sometimes in conflict, right, with what the companies think. And so I think the
mm,
biggest change is that colleagues have a seat at the table, or prospects have a seat at the table that they otherwise did not. And I think the smartest ones have learned how to partner and prove that no matter where they're working, no matter what the policies are, that they're prioritizing their own health and well-being as a means not just to be selfish, but to basically show up as a better colleague for the company at large. And I think
mm,
that we're still in that change. We're still in that evolution, but it's one that we're seeing much more often.
mm. Do you have any good transformation stories, either of individuals or of groups or of companies who have done some of this work?
I do actually. I'll give a shout out to Hyatt. They did a really and leading. It was the first when I was the global head of wellbeing at Hyatt. It was the first company of its kind that really determined putting one single leader in charge of both commercial products and services. So basically, what happened to guests at our hotels and in between hotel stays, and also worked to manage the health and well-being of 150,000 colleagues worldwide. So that was a game changer. One thing they realized with our help is that for us to really be successful at impacting the health and wellness of millions of consumers worldwide, we needed to have people walk the walk and talk the talk. And so we invested in bringing in 900 GMs and our top 200 leaders, and we put them in. We went to San Diego one year. We put them all through, it was a week company conference, but for 3 days we held like 12 breakouts of 90 minutes long. And we really had a conversation with every leader, and we talked about why they should commercially care, which was huge. Why should you care about caring for the health and well-being of yourself, your teams, and associates, and how does that impact the bottom line? So that was one question. The second
Mm,
thing we said is, how do they personally relate to wellness and well-being? What does it mean to them? It might not be how you eat or how you move or sleep, but it could be for you, it's making it home to play catch with your son, right?
mm,
What is that thing? For others, it was financial. They,
mm,
they're changing jobs every 2 years, and so it was financial. And we had them break out and share with others, and then we had them audit their own well-being, and then
mm,
shared our company plans. And so it was a huge investment, but this was just before the pandemic hit, 6 months later. And
mm,
so it was like we gave them a new vocabulary, we proved why they should commercially care, but then we also made sure that they took time thinking about what it personally meant to them so that they could turn around and champion it for their teams, for their colleagues, for their communities within which they operate. And
mhm,
so that takes time and investment, but man, did it pay off, because these are people that were probably better equipped to navigate teams and businesses through a pandemic that really, impacted hospitality most gravely of most vertical industries.
mhm.
So it was a great moment of seeing how it can pay off when it really matters most.
Love it. So if we're in the C-suite, obviously we can make these changes. If we're influencing the C-suite, we can do that. But what if we're not influential or not in a position to be influential and we still want to make a difference? Like, do you have advice on what's like one thing that I can do with my team that will make things better?
Um, well, you said one, but I'm going to say two things. One is
Or
part
7, tell us.
partner with a leader, find a leader who could champion it with you, because I just
Mm.
think that's really important. But I think that I would say the single thing that a colleague can do, whether they manage people or are part of a team, is to talk about expectations of a workday, and how we should work together. And so I'll give you a really straight up example. Um, you could, I find if you've ever had an assistant or you're working with someone and they make an assumption that they have to be on all the time, they have to make sure they're checking their email and their texts and all these kinds of things. Sitting down and having a 5-minute conversation and doing this across the team that says, hey, I might keep odd hours because, I'm a mom or I'm part of a church group on the weekends. And so for me, it's just easier to get to email on a Saturday, but I don't expect you to have to do that. If I need you urgently, I'm going to call or text you. Otherwise, I expect you to get to your email during normal work hours when it works for you. You know, these kinds of conversations are wildly underleveraged, and I think it's so critical when you have teams of people and you want to have the conversation of how do you all show up as your best, what are your boundaries, how can we best support each other, this is how I work to succeed, it might be different from how you work to succeed. Those kinds of conversations don't take long, but they can really pay off, and I think everyone needs to do that so we don't assume how people would like to work. We really have a better understanding of how.
Not only do they not take long, they don't cost anything.
Exactly.
What you're
Exactly.
talking about is free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what are the stakes? What are the stakes of getting this right or getting this better or doing it poorly, both for us as individuals, but more broadly for us as the business?
I mean, I could go on, but I'll say as a business, performance without question.
Mm.
I mean, this is the stake, right? Like if you really care about achieving certain brand and business objectives, figuring out the keys to how best your workforce can perform is critical. And
Mhm.
that's really understanding how they trust you and make sure if you don't have a voice of the employee mechanism to understand how they're really thinking, you can't build upon an organization that lacks trust. And so
Mm.
it's really critical to understand that. So I think performance is that. I also think, I mean, the cost of unwell for workforces. I mean, I think if we're all HR audiences, we know what this is about. It's our healthcare costs continue to rise because we
Mm.
have a largely broken medical system. The only way we can actually reduce those costs and make sure it's used by those who need it most is to get on the preventative side of the equation.
Mhm.
Making sure we're caring for ourselves, we're mitigating the risk of long-term lifestyle disease, we're mitigating the impact of stress, which is chronic disease. It's so critical. Those are huge stakes because it comes down to costs, not just performance, but costs for us as individuals, individual companies, society at large.
Mm. This work, what's the starting place? Like, do you start with employee surveys, or how do you get a baseline of where folks are in this world?
I really look at it. I do an assessment like I mentioned, we look at our ecosystem of well-being sort of as a roadmap, but we really do really intentionally see where the companies are on the spectrum today.
Mm.
How are they prioritizing health and well-being, or how they work across leaders, employees, guests, community members, and often they're doing one or two things well. And so how do you just replicate that and sort of extend it across additional stakeholders?
Mm.
There's typically jewels that we find, and it is born often in HRs. How are they connecting? How do they have the voice of the colleague, the voice of the leader? Where is it in the company today? And if they don't have it, we help them find ways to really understand. Okay, where is it? And we also take a moment to hold up a mirror, right? So
Mhm.
we might be setting the intention to live well, support wellness and well-being, and try to impact business performance. But in reality, we're doing things that are contra to that, right? Counter
Mhm.
to it. And so we
Mhm.
just help them identify what that is. And so I
Mm.
think that the number one thing is you have to go from the inside out,
Mhm.
and looking at where your colleagues are thinking and where your leaders' stance are. It's really where you have to start. I always like to start at the top, but it's not the only doorway in.
Mhm. And you said something about guests, and I'm wondering if you mean that. Like, do we think about this as work that a company does, and thinking about its members or guests or customers as well? Like, does this extend to the entire ecosystem of the product or service that we're putting out, and our role in
Yes. I
those
mean,
folks?
we say customer well-being in our ecosystem, but I refer to all customers as guests. We don't know how long they're staying. We don't know, we don't take them for granted if they're guests. We're not assuming that they're there and they're always loyal. It's like they are guests when they're consuming a product, a service, spending any time with us. And our job is to make sure that they feel as comfortable in this home as possible. And
Hmm.
I think that's it's a different mentality. It lends to a different mentality if you think of them like that.
I think that's really interesting, and I can see how it's more obvious in the travel space specifically. But wow, what if every company in the world, I'm looking at you, Facebook and Instagram and whatever, what if every company in the world were thinking about the health of their customers in the same way as part of the ecosystem that they would want to influence in a positive way?
You're absolutely right, Scott. And a great example of this is when I mentioned healthcare. You think about hospitality and hospitals have the same root word, but they're anonyms, right? People should be checking into a hospital and checking out, ideally, if we do our jobs right. So
Mm,
that's just one more obvious example, but I do think that it's having a guest-driven mentality when it comes to your customers really makes a huge difference.
hmm, hmm. Beautiful. Well, how do people find out more about you if they want to work with you or find out more some of the research that you shared with us?
Sure. They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. They can find us at Kyricos.com. And my email address is my first name at my last name.com. Makes it really easy. So there's lots of ways to reach out to us. And we always promise to get back to you, even though it might take a little bit, but we will. And happy to help wherever we can.
Yeah, beautiful. Um, Mia, what gives you hope?
Ah, the sheer power of humanity. If we were just on the right side of things, I really do believe, just like Anne Frank said, that people are inherently good.
Hmm.
It's just finding a way to enable them to do good, right? And so I think there's so much power in that. And if we just assume that people are good, I think we can do a lot of great things together.
Hmm. I love that. In your work, I imagine some of the work is just waking people up or helping remind themselves that they are good, right? That the work they're doing is good. And I'm
Exactly.
wondering, is there a certain is there a certain point in the discussion, is there a certain topic set that you find really is like, oh, I've got them now, or they're oh now they're making this transition. Like, is there a moment
Yes.
there?
Yes. Listen, we're all so hard on ourselves, and companies are too, right? And so we, much like managing positivity management, we discover the things that are going right and we remind them of that, because too often we're just critical and we're focused on what's going wrong. And so every engagement that we have, we make sure we identify the things to celebrate,
Mm,
because inevitably we're always doing all of us are doing things well, and some things that need improvement, and that goes to companies too. And
mm.
so we partner with them to make sure we shine a light on it.
I love that. Actually, I think this is a superpower for all of us. If we focus on the light, it gives us more strength to deal with the dark.
Exactly.
We don't
Exactly.
ignore the dark, but wow, we spend so much time focus on it.
Yes.
If we just focus
Exactly.
on the light, it gives us more strength to deal.
Exactly.
Mia, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world, and thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and rock on with the People Summit. I look forward to listening in.
All right. Rock on with People Summit. I like it.
Exactly.